We just want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us on our final day of the festival. My name is Amanda Farnell and I'm the operations manager for the Saskatchewan Festival of Words, and this is our managing artistic director, Sarah Simison. If you haven't done so already, please... If you haven't done so already, please take a moment to fill out your evaluations forms and hand in your wristbands to get your name in for the book straws. This is also your last chance to buy raffle tickets. We're going to be doing the draw at the end of the programs today, so get those in. One last message before I hand things over to Sarah. We're asking people if they could mask in here. If you have a mask, we have masks available out in the lobby as well. Just for the comfort of everyone involved, that would be really great. Thank you.
I have one question outside of my notes. Is anybody going to Saskatoon that has an extra seat in their car and may want to get one of our authors to Saskatoon? If yeah, I didn't want to mention it just in case they were like, oh, I don't want to know. Over there, Jeanette Lines is right here. There we go. Thank you. Okay, those two are connected. Thank you very much. So before the panel begins, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land we're on today. Harold Johnson is somebody very close to our hearts, and it was a big loss to the literary community in Saskatchewan and Canada to lose him. We have this thing where we don't normally invite authors more than, 2 years in a row. Every time Harold published a book, we were like, well, this is a different genre. Can we invite him again? Like, he just got invited all the time. We loved him, just so wise and lovely to work with. So this book was published after he passed away. It's called The Power of Story: On Truth, the Trickster, and New Fictions for a New Era. And I'd like to honor him and the people on this land by sharing his words with you today. It has become common in situations like this to give what people are calling a land acknowledgement. Well, I wanted to do something like that as well, but I'm not going to simply acknowledge the people who originally occupied this land. My ancestors, the Ahenakew, and my cousins, the Métis. Instead, I want to acknowledge the actual land we're sitting on. All these trees and that water over there and the grass and all the animals and the birds and everything else. And the spirits of this place are all part of a shared story that we, Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike, are included in. The land, us, the water, the sky, we're all part of one big, beautiful story. So, yeah. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the staff here at the Moose Jaw Events Center for being so wonderful to work with. They actually sponsored the venue for us today, so we're really thankful to have great partners here. And the breakfast this morning, so a round of applause for our breakfast. Matt Fraze, our sound guy, has been running around all morning. Jeremy and Liam at the back, who've been doing all of our videography, and Liam pulling all the cords out of his bag this morning that we had forgotten and he happened to have. So thank you guys so much. They've been doing such a great job. Your turn.
We will now begin our first panel, Evolving Poetics, which will be followed by a 20-minute break. So now over to our moderator, Saskatchewan's Youth Poet Laureate, Lauren Klassen. You want to take this with you?
Hi, good morning. Thank you all for coming. It's so nice to see everyone here as the closing day of the Festival of Words. And welcome to the panel of Evolving Poetics. So today we're going to be lucky. We're going to get to hear from three amazing poets based out of Canada. We're going to hear from Rita Bouvier, Austin Ahenakew, and Kay Kassirer. So as I love to see, also it's very lovely to see, thank you to all of those that are, being conscientious and masking. I know we have some people on the panel that, yeah, would appreciate it if you did take the time to mask, so thank you. I was gonna give a land acknowledgement, but I know Sarah already did that, but maybe I'll just give another one, just for good measure, I guess. It's cool to think about land acknowledgements because, you know, often we say, especially after attending Michelle's workshop and listening to Truth Telling, her collection of essays, that we don't want empty land acknowledgements. It can't just stop at land acknowledgements. We need action and we need change. And I think it's very powerful to see, you know, this is a room full of change makers, writers, storytellers, and I think, yeah, it's when we talk about evolving poetics, it's very powerful to see how words and stories can change people's hearts and make a difference. So yeah, as our panelists are getting mic'd, I guess I'll just mention we are gathered here on the unceded land of Treaty 4 territory, the traditional homeland of the Ahenakew, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the Métis. As we find ourselves here, we reflect on how this land has been a place of gathering, and we reflect that Indigenous peoples have been on this land since time immemorial. Today, we acknowledge that we all are beneficiaries of this treaty. And although this treaty was made in 1874, we acknowledge that treaty rights have not been upheld and honored as intended. To truly move forward in the spirit of reconciliation, there's much work ahead of us. And then I love this quote by Louis Riel. "My people will sleep for 100 years, but when they awake, it will be the artists who give them their spirit back." And so as a room full of writers, poets, storytellers, I just want to hold those words close to our hearts. And yeah, thank you all again. And I think our panelists are ready to come up, so let's give them a big round of applause. Awesome. Okay, now I'm gonna have a seat because this is, you can sit there, yeah, for sure. We have one extra chair. Okay, so now for the questions. The theme of today's panel is talking about how poetry has evolved and, you know, kind of how it's changed forms in our lives. But let's first give a bit of an introduction. I guess maybe I'll get the three of you to introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about how you got into poetry, and yeah. And then I'll start asking this list we have. But yeah, Austin, let's start with you.
Alrighty, my name is Austin Ahenakew. I go by the stage name The Noble Savage. That name comes from a term that was gave to our ancestors. Our highest members of our tribes were called noble savages, and the rest of us were just called savages. Mm-hmm. So this is the way of me kind of claiming it back, and yeah. So that's the origin of my name, and I've been writing since I was in grade 9, so for a good portion of time. And yeah, it's been great. I just went to Vancouver for SIPS last year, which was pretty fun, made it to semifinals. And yeah, I can pass that on to Kay now.
Hi, I'm Kay. I use they, them pronouns, and I started writing seriously when I was in the psych ward when I was 16, as a way to work through my feelings and kind of process a lot of what was going on in my mind. Someone in the hospital told me about something called a poetry slam, and so when I got out, I went to a poetry slam and I won my first slam and just kept going back. And I've been going back for over a decade now to various poetry events. And I write a lot about mental health, I write about gender and sexuality, I write about being a sex worker, I write about grief, and I write about disability.
And Rita.
Hi. Good morning. It's still morning, right?
Yeah.
Good morning to all of you. I'm Rita Bouvier, and I know that some of the questions pointed to writing as a career. I need to let you know that writing is not my career. I write. I am a writer, but my career has been in education, which has brought me to do a lot of leadership work, not only locally, but nationally and internationally. And so that it clearly informs the work that I do. And I always like to say as well that I feel in many ways very privileged to come from the community that I come from, which is Saskatchewan, Lacrosse in northern Saskatchewan, with and privileged in terms of my kinship and family, the community that I'm from, the cultural values that were passed on to me to live a good life. And of course, being an educator that has been exposed to the travel that I've had the opportunity and to be part of the various movements that have been happening with Indigenous people across the globe has offered me insights and experience. And so I think it's safe to say that not only did it inform my work and career in education, but also my poetry.
Thank you. Thank you all. Let's just give another round of applause for our panel. And I'm very lucky on a personal level because I know each of these three folks. I met Austin first at Voices of Today, which was a festival. It was a national spoken word festival that Kay organized. And that was what really threw me into poetry. So I have a lot to thank for Kay. And then Rita just has had an enormous presence in the poetry community. And I admire you and look up to you so much. So, okay, now that we're going into the evolution of poetry, let's first start with how does your sense of place, when we think of place as terms of where we're from or the land, how does that kind of inform your writing? Whoever wants to start with that, I guess.
I could go first, I guess. I know from experience that in Regina, where I'm based from, the stage is a bit more direct, and it's a little bit more loose. And then in Toronto and Vancouver, it's a little bit more loud and fun. Toronto specifically, I remember the first time I got on a stage there, someone in the crowd was like, "Go in, poet!" and people yelling from the stage and yelling, and I was throwing me off a little bit. But that was just their way. It was a lot more fun and exciting, and it threw me off a little bit from the kind of slow, steady pace that Regina has. But it definitely forms a different kind of style in the poets that come out of each area.
Yeah, totally. Anyone else?
Yeah, so I started doing poetry slams in what's colonially known as Ottawa, and then moved to Toronto and Vancouver. And each city's scene is a little bit different. And all three of those scenes really shaped who I am as a poet. I think partially I got really lucky because Vancouver and Toronto are both teams, they'll send their poetry slam teams to American festivals. Mm-hmm. So I got to go compete at festivals in the States, and that shaped my poetry because the scene's just very different there, much more intense, competitive, people go in. And yeah, I think a lot of my poetry has been shaped by the people that I've met at various festivals and at those three communities. Toronto is also very intense in terms of slam, and Vancouver is where I kind of learned to write some lighter poems. I find a lot of people in Vancouver appreciate softer and funny poems, which isn't necessarily the case, especially at slams in the States. So it's been interesting getting to pick up little pieces from all of the different communities I've gotten to be in.
Well, I'd like I said, based on the experience that I've had through my work, I guess, I think of place as my escape. And when I say that, I mean place being the natural world out there. And where I grew up was in the boreal forest in northern Saskatchewan. In fact, while I was listening to the other two panelists with respect to place, I was thinking, I remember meeting one of our premiers of Saskatchewan in high school, and he asked me what I thought of Regina. I said, your trees are too skinny. And of course, he didn't realize, because I had come to Regina, to the legislature, because of my marks, I think, in social studies, and he didn't realize that I was visiting from Prince Albert, but I actually came from the north, and clearly, as I say, it's my escape. And so when I'm writing about themes that are very difficult for me, but that I want to portray out into the world and to other readers, I often find myself escaping and returning to, as I say, the natural world. And to be specific, I'll just tell you that I talk to the moon. And the moon answers back.
That's so nice. Thank you. So talking about, kind of your personal connection to poetry, how have you seen poetry kind of evolve in you, or how has it changed you? Whether it's how your writing style has changed as you've written over the years, or like any personal impact it's had on your life. Whoever wants to take on that easy.
I can start if you guys like. Well, so I'm the elder of the group here. I'm the older. No, I'm going to say not the elder. That means I am smart, but I am the older. And so I was bred on a book of good poems, along with, of course, the influence of my grandparents who raised me in Saskatchewan. And the way in which my grandmother was great in her lamentations, lamenting about the things going on in our communities. And while my grandfather was kind of like the trickster, telling me stories as we walked through the graveyard of, the people, particularly the people they had buried on the knoll, which were the priests and the nuns, including Sarah Riel, that he would tell us incredibly funny stories about the people who led less and holier lives. And so clearly my influence is, from that kind of joy, and as I said, the lamentations of my grandmother and the Book of Good Poems, so which is basically British. I'm telling my age, right? Book of Good Poems, mandatory. It was mandatory. At least you guys get a choice now. And I think it, in many ways, poetry has evolved in terms of its accessibility, but there are things, I think, in terms of poetry that really have stayed the same. The tools that we use, in fact, I see lots of people returning to some of the forms and structure, and I know clearly informs my own writing.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I started writing from a very intense emotional place, which I think is pretty common for spoken word poets and poets in general, writers. We've got a lot of emotions. And button poetry shaped a lot of my writing style when I was younger, which is a YouTube channel that has a lot of viral poems on it. And a lot of those poems are very intense, very heavy poems, which is a lot of what is shared at slam competitions. And once I started competing, especially once I made it onto my first poetry slam team, my writing style changed, because I was no longer writing to express my feelings. I was writing to win. You're writing for a competition. I remember when I made it onto my first slam team, the coach said, no love poems. Love poems don't do well at a slam. Judges don't want to hear gooey stuff about how much you love someone. They want to hear your trauma. And so that shaped my writing for quite a while, sometimes putting things on stage that I was still processing and not yet ready to share with people. And as I grew up and sort of people started talking more about taking care of yourself and taking care of the audience. And so I did sort of a pivot and more recently I've been trying to write more poems that have softness in them, that have love, and trying to write for me again instead of just writing to win a competition.
To continue on that, I can relate to that quite a bit as well myself. Yeah, the competition is quite fun in the poetry game, but it also gets you stuck in a headspace of just leading on with what the crowd wants, kind of. And yeah, it kind of does get you settled into that headspace. But to go all the way back to the beginning, I started as a sappy love poet, as I said kind of yesterday as well. But that kind of changed as I moved into competition and stuff like that. And then as I I kind of moved into the hood and moved into a trap house, and I was doing a bunch of stuff down there. And in that time, it gave me a lot broader of a scope on inner city poverty and all that type of stuff. And it really opened up my scope on world issues and things like that, and made me more focused on saying something with my poetry than kind of expressing. Even though I express a lot of my own pain in it, I am a lot more focused on trying to do something with the words I'm saying now. And yeah, so it's very like a therapeutic thing for me as well. Like for Kay, she said that she shares things that are where sometimes she wasn't ready to share. Sometimes I force myself to share those types of things because for me it's a bit therapeutic, and it can, because I hold it all in as a male. So I just hold it in, so then when I get on stage I can put it out and then sometimes break down. And it's nice to have stages where people are accepting enough to let me and allow me to do that. And so yeah, thank you to all of you guys who listen and accept it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys. Oh, just, yeah. Well, I kind of want to, just going off of what you guys shared, thinking about kind of community, and, poetry is quite a different space and atmosphere than other different, art mediums, because you're just being, it doesn't sell.
That's why we have to make it a sport.
Yeah, it's not, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, we're in an event center, no. But you have to show so much of yourself, and you have to be so vulnerable. Buy Rita's book. But I'm just thinking, have you seen, like, your time spent in the community, have you seen the community build, or what's a testament? Could you share a bit about the poetry communities you have been a part of and how they have changed over time, or something a bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's tricky in the spoken word community because there's a lot of burnout, a lot of turnover, a lot of not enough funding, not enough resources, and it's tough. Even just the way the community has shifted because of the capacity of organizers. Like in 2020, the National Poetry Board kind of took a hiatus after like 15 years of pushing and people doing too much and then leaving the community. We kind of have taken a break, and it's been honestly kind of nice seeing everyone get to focus on their own art. I was talking to a friend who mentioned just how each individual community, because there's poetry communities in different cities across the country that then send people to these big national events, most of those cities spend all year working to try and fundraise to send people to these events instead of finding ways to pay themselves and to put that money and energy back into their own communities. And so I think that made it tricky and made it hard for communities to build and create sustainability. So hopefully more of that has been able to happen. It's hard when poetry is not properly funded and there's only so many grants and there's only so much that you can do. But through that all, the spoken word community, even without a national board, even without national festivals, is still so strong. So many of us are so close to each other and support each other. Almost all of my closest friends I know through this community, and that has really been wonderful to be a part of.
Thank you.
So I have probably, I want to just say first of all, before I go further, is that I've become part of, the Saskatchewan Writers Guild and also the League of Canadian Poets, but it's also a time to tell the truth, right? As I said to you, I'm the older in the group, and I can say to you that I think I've danced around the periphery of both the Guild and League of Canadian Poets for a while. And because of that dance on the periphery, I guess you could say I'm also kind of a bit of a rebel rouser activist. And we started the Saskatchewan Aboriginal Writers Circle Incorporated, where we have our own festival once every 2 years, and the Anskok Festival. You should come sometimes, where we bring in Indigenous writers from across Canada and across the globe when we have the opportunity. So I have not often felt like I belonged, but I do now, and that space has really, really changed significantly, both in the Guild and in the League of Canadian Poets. And I can say in a strong way that even the changes have come about more recently in terms of being inclusive of, the poetry that the spoken word poets. And in fact, I think this is the first year they've created various communities that can really inform the League in a way that creates the multitude of voices to give expression to this life.
Is there anything you'd like to add on to those questions, Austin?
Not too much. Just I know that in Regina, it's just kind of still in the early stages of setting up our poetry scene. So ours is kind of just still on a little kind of up and down, kind of getting it going. But I'll just add a little history. I came into the scene because Kay here was actually trying to set up the youth things in Toronto there, and my poetry coach and mentor that I adore is Kat Abenstein, and she was looking for youth poets that brought me into the scene. So yeah, it's just the warmth and care of the community that keeps me coming every time. And you guys answered it very well and have a lot more experience to answer those questions than I do. So yeah, I applaud you too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, even though I'm the moderator, I definitely have seen myself the growth in these communities and making so much space for youth and young writers to have a platform to share their voice and share their words. Kind of shifting some ideas. I have a quote, so an artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to reflect the times by Nina Simone. So as an artist, what message does your poetry have? So for those that maybe are unfamiliar with your work, what message does your poetry have or often reflect?
I kind of talk about a lot about Indigenous struggles and the way appearance is viewed. I talk a lot about PTSD as well, and inner city poverty, as I have mentioned, and a lot about my son as well, Freedom Haven Ahenakew. And yeah, so I'm working on trying to get 2 little chapbooks out. One's called The Trap, about inner city poverty things and my time in the hood. And then the other one is called My Freedom Haven, which will be for a collection of poems dedicated for my son.
Yeah, I guess one of the big things that I love about poetry is hearing poems that kind of describe things that I have gone through and feeling less alone. And I think that's a lot of what I strive to do with my poetry. I share personal things about my life, joys and hardships and everything in between, and hope that someone out there resonates with it. I have a lot of people that tell me after shows that I've never heard someone talk about that on stage before, or I'm so glad to know someone else feels the same way, or it's nice to hear that you've gone through the same thing as me. And so that's kind of the message that I try to get through in my poetry is just sharing things that hopefully resonate with people. Talking about, as I mentioned earlier, mental health, gender and sexuality, being a sex worker, being disabled, grieving, losing a parent. These are all things that I focus on in my work, and hopes of helping other people feel less alone the way that other people's poetry has helped me feel less alone.
Thank you. I think in a similar fashion, you know, the word message really didn't resonate with me in terms of the question itself, but I don't necessarily think I want to pass a specific message to anyone, as much as I want to create a relational space with other human beings. And but that said, I mean, I have the benefit of having written an essay on this question, and in terms of my own work, and clearly one of the things I'm doing is remembering, you know, and remembering the good things of my own childhood and the culture I grew up in, and so I use a lot of my language becomes very important to the work I'm doing, obviously, because I can express sometimes in translation to the English language what it is that when I'm remembering in particular, especially if I'm using the voice of my grandmother, who, you know, whose soft voice still kind of rings. So I'm often remembering. And the other thing that I'm often doing is, so I am Isuhkehtaman, I am gathering strength in the face of, I think, the kinds of issues that we face, not only in our own community as Indigenous people, but as we face as human beings in the world. And so I often find myself, you know, resisting and writing a counter kind of narrative in the poetry. And the third thing that I, of course, I'm doing is the Ipuataman. I am dreaming, and I'm in this unconscious kind of state, creating usually a better world. And finally, I'm often reaching. It's not deep. Just reaching out to express joyfulness in this life.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah. Wow. That's just so powerful hearing from each of you kind of what your poetry reflects. And I guess going off of Rita, kind of what you said about, and Austin, I know I know all of your work, but I know a lot of you, often poets feel the need to respond to, their environments and things like that. So do you feel the need to respond to current or other significant historical events through your work? You want me to start?
Yeah.
You can.
Yeah, I can start. Actually, I do that quite often. Actually, in one of my most popular pieces, Reserved for the Beast, I think of it in 3 story arcs. So there's a beginning arc, middle arc, and then an end arc. And that final arc in that poem is actually removed and then inserted with current events so that the poem stays current and up to date. So when it was first written, it was about Colton Boushie. And then at this point, it is now about the forgotten graves and everything like that. It has actually progressed like about 4 or 5 different times throughout the years as new things have happened, and it hasn't gotten any less true. So, but anyways, I do try and keep with a lot of the current events that are going on.
That's so cool. That's so cool that you can, kind of your work is always growing and changing depending on what's happening in the world. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah, I can go ahead.
Yeah.
So, sure. I would say the question again.
So, do you feel the need to respond to current or other significant historical events in your work?
I think that I probably do situate myself always in the current environment and current time that I'm in. And in fact, that's how I've been introducing A Beautiful Rebellion, this latest collection. It's very much informed by, what I see happening in the world around me, and not only at a national level in our own country, with truth and reconciliation and decolonization at more of a global level around the world, but also the toxic kinds of politics that are out there. And yes, I'm often responding to that, so I can center myself.
Yeah, thank you.
And hopefully when I say myself, I mean us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that I definitely do feel the need to respond to events that have happened or are happening. I hope that one day it'll be a want instead of a need. But right now, it just feels really important as a poet with the platform that I have to speak about these things, especially as someone carrying a lot of marginalized identities who I want to speak about these. It's important to me to help people learn more as well. Like I mentioned earlier, like one of the reasons that I write is to help other people feel less alone. But another reason I write is to help people hear stories that aren't often told. And so within that, I'm often responding to things that are happening, like when FOSTA SESTA was passed in the States, which was a bill to end sex trafficking that ended up hurting sex workers and pushing traffickers further underground and harder to find them. I wrote a lot more about sex work as that was happening and talked about that. And more recently, I've been writing a lot about the pandemic that we are still in, because these are things that I'm not hearing people talk about enough, or a lot of people feel afraid to talk about these things. And so as someone who feels able to, I try my best to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And to build off of that, I guess, how has your message kind of evolved? And maybe you can, I guess all of you have shared a bit about what you write about, but do you find your work has grown, or how do you find maybe your style of writing has changed as times go by? Like if you look at your first pieces of spoken word, or your first poems that you wrote, do you find a difference, or are there still similarities?
Yeah, there's such a difference. I was 15, 16 when I started writing, and it was just so angsty. It was a lot of cries for help. It was a lot of just trying to figure out what was going on inside my head. And while that's still sometimes what I'm doing, the ways that I've done that and the things I'm writing about have changed. Went from writing about not feeling understood to writing to understand myself, and writing about how I now understand myself. And throughout various points in my life, like I came out at 15, so when I first started writing, I was writing a lot about gender and sexuality. And then I started doing sex work, and I started writing about sex work. And then I lost my mom, and I started writing a lot about grief. And then the pandemic happened, and I started writing a lot more about disability. And so my writing has shifted a lot over the last decade plus, as the things that are like going on and feeling important to me, or discovering myself or experiencing things in the world have happened. My writing shifts to accommodate those shifts.
Yeah. Well, I would say that I'm hoping that my writing has changed over time, and mainly in the sense of its poetics. And but that said, it's kind of interesting, when you, as I was thinking and listening to you guys in posing, I was thinking, so this is A Beautiful Rebellion is my 4th book of poetry, but I know the first one I wrote was more, I was much younger, but I didn't get I wasn't published until later in life, because I didn't think what I wrote was good. It was just for myself, and that was Blueberry Clouds, and most of those were memory pieces of growing up in the community that I grew up. But I also recognized, even in Blueberry Clouds, I was already responding to the political environment I found myself in, kind of the toxic political environment. And then with Poetics, it was thematically, it was really just remembering to be respectful, and to be, Poetics just means to be respectful, to walk carefully, to always do things in a good way. In some ways I was probably honoring my grandmother. And then in the Gamunsa for the Seasons, which is the 3rd book of poetry, I think I might have been in a period of distress, and wondering, how do we really transform the societies in which we live? And I was hearkening back to, in the research I was doing, remembering that my ancestors, when they were paddling through all the rivers and narrows in the early days and during the fur trade, I read that to get through their day, they had more than 50 songs to sing. And so I titled my poem "The Gamunsa for the Seasons." And then this last one, as I said, is really, it's my own theory of the the kind of resistance that Indigenous people have mounted, I guess, across the globe in some ways. And again, hearkening back to the past, and remembering, it isn't always violent. And I've titled it "A Beautiful Rebellion" for that reason.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
something you said reminded me of something else as well. You talking about writing for yourself, and I touched on this earlier, but another way that my writing has changed is when I first started writing, I was really writing for myself, and then I was writing for an audience and for judges and for scores, and more recently I've shifted back, as I said, to writing for myself again, writing softer things instead of needing everything to be hard-hitting, writing shorter poems or longer poems instead of needing my poems to be 3 minutes long to fit in the time limit that you get with slam. And so that's another way that my writing has shifted over the years.
Beautiful. Do you want to add anything to that? I have one more question, and then I think we wanted to leave 10 minutes for a Q&A. Do you have anything to add on how your writing has evolved?
I could just add quickly. I used to focus on rhyming every single line because I started out as a rapper when I was young and in elementary. So it's kind of evolved a lot past that, but I do still incorporate a lot of rhythm and flow into my poetry, and it comes through quite a bit. But yeah, it's just evolved past the need for that rhyme now.
Beautiful. So I guess going off of what Rita said, my last question is, how do you think, or do you think, poetry can transform and change the world?
Well, okay.
An easy question, of course.
Okay, it's an easy question. Well, I think when you look historically, and again, I'm giving a very Eurocentric history here, referring to, but I was schooled in that way too, so that it has changed, people's minds when it's powerful and beautiful, and so I think it has, it can do that, but it can also just bring joy and quiet moments to people. I mean, it's interesting that at weddings and at, celebrations of life, guess what people pull out?
Yeah, I definitely think poetry can change the world, and has been changing the world. I think art in general is just a beautiful way to convey messages in oftentimes more accessible ways, depending on the language, but especially in spoken word. I find I've learned so much just from what I've heard at poetry slams that has informed my activism, my life, the way that I live my life and interact with the world. And I think that by hearing poems and hearing stories and hearing songs, hopefully other people will feel that too, where you learn things and that changes you and how you interact with the world around you.
To give a little bit of real world example, I am working at a shelter now in Regina, and I often will perform some of my poetry at night to practice, because I do the 12-hour night shifts over the weekends. And over the time, I have a lot of free time on my hands, so I'll often be practicing. And some clients, as you can imagine, won't be able to sleep during the night, so they'll kind of be pacing around. And I'll often perform some of my poetry that talks about my time in the hood and my experience with all that stuff. And there's been a number of clients who have, we have clients, and then there's like residents. Residents are the ones who are kind of like progressing into stages of recovery and moving into our programming and getting some of the stuff worked out. And they're the ones we see a bit more often. And a lot of the ones that I perform with and speak to, they become very friendly, very very chummy with me, and we get really close together. And they also stick around a lot more often. And yeah, I can see that they feel very deeply with it. And it just feels really nice to be affecting the world in that way a lot more, and like being able to see it directly firsthand. And yeah, so I believe that it can do it in small ways and very large scale ways as well.
Beautiful. Oh. Well, what a treat it's been. Now I'll open it up to the audience for anyone that has questions for our panelists. Yeah.
I can't imagine feeling that vulnerable when you're first starting out. That's something I have trouble with as a writer. When you first started out, how was it to kind of open yourself up that way, kind of go through the pain, go through the vulnerable times, and just let yourself write?
Terrifying. Really scary. But then getting that positive people in the audience coming up and saying that was amazing, saying they related to the story, thanking me for talking about something, that helped it be less scary. So it wasn't, in the moment when I was on stage performing my poems, it was terrifying. And then hearing the ways that people were moved by it and just nice things that people had to say helped me be less scared to continue doing it. And so I think in general, it's going to start off really scary, but it tends to get easier as you do it more.
I'd also like to add, use whatever crutches you might need to do it. When I first got on stage, my hair was draped down to here over my face. So I was you couldn't see me at all. You probably wouldn't recognize me if I flipped my hair up. I would stand like a statue with my head like this and not look at any of you. And yeah, that's how it was for like a good year and a half probably of performing. And people still loved it, would still come up and talk. And if I stumbled over a line, I would get a bunch of snaps and support. It's just the loving way of the community. And yeah, it takes a little bit to move past the crutches if you do need them, but it's they can really help you get up there and help you feel a bit more comfort.
Totally. Awesome. We'll go to Blair.
Okay. So this is mainly for Kay and Austin. That spoken word as a form always seems to gravitate towards these really raw, visceral, personal truths, personal experiences, personal traumas. And I'm wondering, do you think there's a place in the realm of spoken words to use as more of just kind of a storytelling medium, or do you think it really only works when it's like coming right out of your veins?
I think that speaks a lot to what Kay has been talking a lot about today, about the kind of like getting stuck in heading for points, trying to bring a wow factor to your poetry. I know that I still have that issue a little bit with arranging my sets. I've been told that my stuff starts here and then it just drops down. And just tanks down with sadness because I have like one poem. It's 1 minute long, so like there's like, just drops and then I just bump of happiness. So yeah, for me it's a little bit difficult to write about anything that isn't very raw to myself, and I think I internally are a little less happy with some of the stuff that I've written that isn't as hard hitting because maybe I just don't feel as emotionally connected to it. But I think that there are a lot of poems out there that are a lot lighter. They just aren't brought out to a lot of the competitions and things like that where people are trying to show out a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of space, and well, I think there is definitely some space, and I hope that it continues to expand the amount of space we have for storytelling and for poems that aren't just so intensely full of trauma. I think, yeah, as you said, and as I've been saying, I think a lot of it is because of the competition aspects and because of what judges look for. And especially the way that a lot of people know about spoken word from YouTube videos. And a lot of those YouTube channels, those poems are filmed at competitions, at these national festivals. So it's more intense than just a slam in your home city. You're flying to a different city to compete against the top poets from their cities. And so people tend to bring their hardest hitting, most intense stuff, especially because that's the stuff that makes it onto the YouTube channel. And then once it's on YouTube, that can help your career sometimes. And so I think there hasn't been as much space on those platforms and on those YouTube channels for those poems, but I hope that we move towards that, because I think spoken word, more so than slam, there is so much space for that, more space than is being used. And I hope that more people move into that space and start to do that. It's something I've been focusing on with my writing, trying to write more poems that aren't just, here's my trauma, what do you think? And yeah, so I think there is space, and I hope that space gets used more.
I think. Awesome. Let's go to the back over there. Yeah.
Rita, this is going to sound outlandish, but I have to ask. I think what we as non-Indigenous people need, with all due respect to the application of the land, we need to know Indigenous stories as vividly as we know the land knowledge. Give us a story that will give us a better, stronger sense of your culture, your sense of community that we need to know that we never learned from those languages.
Oh, that is.
Did
That is
everyone
a
hear?
huge ask,
Did
but-
everyone hear that question? Was everybody able? It basically was asking that instead of maybe land acknowledgements, what we need are like more cultural stories from Indigenous perspectives. And Rita's book is on sale out in the hall if you want to take some of those stories home. Buy a few of her. You can find. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
yeah.
Lauren.
Yes, please go.
Thank you for
go support
saving
these
me.
artists. Yes, yeah.
I can also speak to that a tiny bit. I've actually been doing land acknowledgement performances, as well as I've seen a lot of other Indigenous artists come out and do performances, and just having different events hold space for that, and work towards reconciliation, and hold the space for Indigenous artists, and give the support and stuff like that. And then you can see the art and the stories and stuff like that in different form of land acknowledgement. And so there are different kind of like ways to do that.
I wonder, no pressure, Rita, do you want to give a little reading if we have time?
Well,
yeah, let's make the time.
Let's make this happen. Okay.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that. I wanted to honor your question, and I thought, well, I could do it by way of poetry. On Canada, a magnificent failure. On Canada's 150th. You see, Louis Riel's actions as leader were never his alone, despite the tired binary narrative you keep telling yourself. Was he hero or traitor? Was he sane or insane? In kinship, I offer a thread of a story. His sister, Sarah Riel, after joining the Sisters of Charity, lived in my home community of Île-à-la-Crosse, where she is buried. Their paternal grandparents, Jean-Baptiste Riel and Margaret Boucher-Denay, met in Île-à-la-Crosse. Their father, Jean-Louis, was born there. You see, he was a member of a family, a member of a community of people with a shared history and culture, tenets for kinship, human and non-human, cooperative and fiercely protective of their freedom, a member of an emerging society, O Canada. It was inside these forces he lived out his life and responsibilities, enmeshed as they were with his own dreams, aspirations for a good life, Mi'kmaq, with all its joys and disappointments, much like our own lives today. To the very end of his short life, Louis Riel gave us all the best of our humanity by refusing to plead insanity. So it is written.
Beautiful. And so I'm looking at Sarah, but I want to just quickly, oh, we're over time, but are there any, just last call, any last questions? If not, let's just give another big round of applause for our panel. Awesome.
And thank you, Lauren.
Oh,
We're just going to take a 10-minute break so you can refill your drinks, shop for some books like this one. And make sure you drop off your evaluation forms and wristbands at the registration desk. And the book basket draws are all going to happen after this. And raffle tickets too. So thank you.